In the days following that night of despair, Paul realized why it happened. Since he left Oakport, he was slowly developing partly unconscious conceit that he was self-sufficient. In Oakport, he developed a life of prayer motivated by emotional distress. Over the years, the level of grace increased. He was pleased he had the courage to give up Oakport and to be alone. But in Kirkland, he began to make the mistake that his own strength made his life possible. The routine of work and solitude that he had developed. But his store of grace was dissipating. Without emotional crisis, he was not motivated to be in deep prayer, which is surrender of himself to Creator of life, who he had worshipped as the divine mother of the universe. He had to get back into frequent prayer, and his apartment was not a holy space. There was a chapel at the side of the Catholic Church that was open during the day for prayer. He began to go on a regular basis. In a Catholic prayer, there are the words, Holy Mary, Mother of God. To a child or a person not familiar with Christianity, they might reasonably infer that means Mary is God also. Since in the natural world, a mother and child are always the same kind. Indeed, in spite of Catholic theology, on a folk level, those who pray to Mary might assume she is God, which might seem totally normal to people who lived in eras before the dominance of monotheistic religion. God as Divine Mother has many worshippers in India, and in America there are some also. Thus, at the folk level, there are many who have a devotion to Mary, and the theology of who she is understood to be is ignored in the heart of prayer. However, the symbology of the cross is crucial, for it encourages a person in contemplation to accept death of self, and to know that there is also experiential resurrection of life. What is the self? It is not the human body, in spite of how much a person has the assumption they are the same. The self is a function of the mind, and the self is psychological. Thus, it contains concepts, understandings, memory, assumptions, attitudes, emotions, sensations. The self contains a complexity of patterns of awareness that are mostly unconscious. But there are patterns of awareness that are not self. In general, that is called the world. Other people, communities, society, the built environment, the natural environment. But there is also the realm of culture and the spiritual realm. Thus, personal awareness includes much that is not self. However, it is possible that self-awareness patterns can conflict with awareness of the world. If severe enough, there can be personal existential crisis. For many people, that can only be solved for by spiritual awareness, which may include capacity and ability to accept decrease of some self-awareness patterns. The clergy of the Boston Fredonian Church were all women. Maria Theos was the name of Mother of the Universe, creator of all life. The church had its origins as a small secret sect within the Byzantine Empire and managed to survive in several villages in the Carpathian Mountains. Those villages managed to emigrate in their entirety to America during the decades before World War I, mostly to cities in the Midwest, but some made their home in Boston. They came with skills and some capital, so the American Fredonian communities prospered within a nation growing fast in the 20th century. But with each decade, also in growth was assimilation, especially because of marriage outside of the community. But before the decay of being a distinct community, Fredonian Americans built their churches. The churches survived, and some Americans of various heritage started to join, especially in the latter decades of the 20th century. People who desired to worship God as Divine Mother. Most of the women who were full-time members of the contemporary Fredonian Church were also members of a group household, which was usually a renovated small apartment building, so that it had a large common rooms. Mothers with children and women without children shared the responsibilities of caring for the children. Two older women were elders and had some overall responsibility for the household. Fathers would visit, but not live there. Other men who were friends might visit, but de facto a visitor was a friend of the household. Without the spirit of Maria Theos present in the spiritual awareness of the women, it is doubtful such a cooperative household could exist. The men who had special relationships with women who were of the Fredonian Church, those men did not need the extent of physical relationship that most modern people think necessary, because the quality of love they experienced was beyond what most people ever experience. It took only 2 months to build the first stage of New Oakport, because so much was previously manufactured and assembled into transportable units in the factory in Omaha. Even the foundation was made from precast reinforced cement segments bolted together. This first New Oakport was small, only about 200 residents. It took 20 years to build about half of the second stage of New Oakport, and about 5,000 people lived there. Except for the use of a backhoe to dig foundations, almost no modern machinery was used to build the larger New Oakport. It was built by hand. Both the building techniques and the architecture were mostly derived from the 19th century. But the systems were hybrids of older and the most modern technology. Wind was the dominant source of energy, but instead of it being converted to electricity, elaborate systems of gears, pulleys, cables, weights, transferred and stored mechanical energy that was used for most systems, including heat pumps, motors, etc. Only a little electricity was generated for low voltage electronics and LED lights. It was 10 years and enough buildings were complete so that the first families arrived. But these households were of the Fredonian church pattern. In other words, they were matriarchal and contained several mothers and their children, plus some older women. Men who were fathers lived outside the household. The builders' community had been celibate, but only some joined family households. Thus, the culture of New Oakport had the expectation of celibacy unless family formation was joined. Although men who would be or were fathers lived outside the household of women, they were attitudinally and emotionally part of it. They visited, shared meals, and sometimes slept there. Thus, New Oakport grew slowly. The intensity of spiritual awareness of the community was sustained over the years and decades, partly because secular concerns never became dominant. The community had time to absorb and integrate new residents, and the spiritual culture evolved. New Oakport from the beginning spent much time in cultural participation. Only 20 hours a week was spent at the physical tasks of building. There was much time creating various cultural performance: song, expressive dance, music, spoken word. Various states of human awareness were communicated. Culture was how purgatorial awareness development could progress for the community. Relatively false, but human emotional experience was brought to consciousness for the audience, and also portrayed was human capacity to transcend that and have revealed higher spiritual community awareness. Culture is how everyone in New Oakport could attain a level of personal transformation without that primarily being dependent on personal contemplation. But there was time for personal contemplation also. And often in solitude, a person would remember and reflect on aspects of cultural performance they had experienced. Thus, cultural portrayal of archetypal human purgatorial experience displaced to a large extent the need for personal psychological knowledge. A resident of New Oakport did not necessarily have to recover personal psychological history in order to go beyond their unconscious limitations of awareness. The powerful cultural representations allowed deep psychological awareness that was human, but not necessarily specific to a person's past events. But unlike secular culture, the portrayal of archetypal psychological human awareness was always paired with portrayal of experiential transformation and spiritual awareness, which was often expressed via the beauty of music, word, or dance. All of the culture of New Oakport was of the same purpose as worship service: to facilitate and sustain a high level of community spiritual awareness. Out of that awareness, there was also some exploration of spiritual understanding. In other words, philosophy and theology. But that was not given undue importance. Academic understanding by itself cannot generate awareness. And without having the community spiritual awareness of New Oakport, such language would be close to meaningless.